It was pitch black over the Atlantic on the night of July 5, 1942, when a lone British Wellington crept across the waves. U-boat captains believed night gave them safety. As one survivor noted after the fact, American beacons and searchlights are visible at night. That April entry from U-85's log hinted at a new Allied weapon. In that instant, a 22 million candela searchlight, the Leigh Light, pierced the darkness. At 1:20, the bomber's pilot flicked it on. The sea suddenly flashed daylight bright, and the German U-502 was revealed on the surface. Depth charges cascaded around her. Minutes later, she sank. This first kill, using the Leigh Light, stunned the U-boat arm. Until then, not one submarine had been sunk in the preceding 5 months. Within minutes, night had turned to day for that crew. U-boats had long exploited the cloak of darkness. In 1941 and early 1942, Allied patrols over the Bay of Biscay managed only a single U-boat kill, despite thousands of flight hours. Convoys were being lost at an alarming rate. 3 Allied ships going down each day in mid-1942. One naval analyst grimly noted, the exchange rate was 0. Not one U-boat had yet been sunk. Coastal Command aircraft prowled at night with flares and radar. But flares warned U-boats, and radar alone could not guide an attack within the final mile. By mid-1942, Britain's scientists and engineers had had enough. They needed a way to literally turn night into day on demand. The solution was ingenious. Squadron leader Humphrey Lee, a Coastal Command officer, proposed a blinding searchlight to hang under an anti-submarine aircraft. The result was the Leigh Light, a 22 million candela, 24-inch carbon arc lamp. In practice, a Wellington or Liberator would patrol on radar alone. Then, when a U-boat surfaced to recharge, the crew would flip on the lamp at the last moment. One trial in March 1941 fitted a Leigh Light under a Wellington's belly, and the concept proved sound. However, the Air Ministry had initially favored a competing turbine light system, so operational rollout was slow. Savage and Parsons, Ltd., persevered with Lee's design, and by June 1942, Coastal Command began flight testing Wellingtons with retractable dustbin lights. In theory, this let the bomber close to a target silently on radar, then expose the sub to daylight with no preliminary warning. Crucially, the Leigh Light was integrated with airborne ASV radar. Early ASV, Mk, 2 sets could detect a surfaced submarine at several miles, but lost track at close range. Pilots used radar to guide them close, then the Leigh Light for the kill. Later, ASV Mk3 10-centimeter radar, introduced in 1943, was undetectable by German METOX receivers, making detection even more stealthy. In flight tests, the Leigh Light performed brilliantly. A Wellington crew reported that the sea was instantly flooded with light, revealing every detail of the sub on the surface. Once the Leigh Light was added, the night attacks did not give any warning to the submarine. Key specifications of the Leigh Light included intensity around 22 million candela, beam about 24 inches across, with a mile of range, installation in a retractable pod or wing-mounted nacelle, and power from onboard generators or batteries. Combined with the limited warning of radar, it effectively turned each night patrol into a sudden breaking dawn over the enemy. The first combat test came on June 4th to 5th, 1942. That night, Wellington R4 Rover of 172 Squadron patrolled the Bay of Biscay. Pilot Jefferson Greswell's radar made a contact. The Italian submarine Luigi Torelli, surfacing near La Pallas. Greswell crept in low. At 1:27, he triggered the Leigh Light. It operated exactly as hoped, the report noted. The beam picked out Torelli's hull and wake clearly. The U-boat crew, taken by surprise, swung up their guns and blazed into the night. But in the glare, their tracer was lost in the sky. Greswell dropped 4 depth charges. All landed around the Torelli, badly damaging her. The crippled Italian sub limped to neutral Spain under tow, out of the fight. It was proof the Leigh Light worked. A month later came the first kill. In the early hours of July 5, 1942, Pilot Officer Wiley B. Howell, an American volunteer in Coastal Command, spotted a radar contact in Wellington H for Harry. Shining the light on, he identified U-502, Depth charges followed and sank it within minutes. This confirmed kill, after a long barren spell, stunned U-boat command. By July's end, U-boats in the Biscay were outright afraid of night. Admiral Carl Dönitz ordered most U-boats to avoid surfacing after dusk. The once safe darkness had become a death trap. The operational impact of the Leigh Light was enormous. Within weeks, U-boats found the Bay of Biscay a gauntlet. By August 1942, intercepts showed U-boat commanders preferred to take their chances in daytime so they could at least spot attacking aircraft. Coastal Command intensified night patrols. Squadrons 172, 612, 53, 59, 86, and others flew Wellington, Halifax, and Liberator sorties with Leigh Lights and radar along convoy lanes. Shipping losses dropped precipitously. British analysts recorded that, by late 1942, monthly tonnage sunk by U-boats had fallen from about 600,000 tons to 200,000 as the U-boat threat waned. Aerial kills mounted, too. Though statistics vary, aircraft were now scoring frequently. For example, April 1943 saw around 40 U-boats destroyed in the Atlantic, a majority by air patrols. After the introduction of the Leigh Light, the U-boat arm was on the defensive. Improved Allied radar, long-range planes, and the light meant nowhere was safe. At night, naval records showed the change clearly. Coastal Command reported only 7 U-boats sunk in all of 1942 by aircraft and ships combined. But by May 1943, U-boat losses soared to dozens per month, while Allied shipping losses plunged. Rear Admiral Noble of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet remarked that by mid-1943, the very presence of Allied aircraft overhead was crippling enemy submarines. The human dimension of the Leigh Light War was dramatic. Allied aircrew wrote of strange, cinematic encounters. They would stalk a contact for miles, then in an instant paint the submarine in white light as if the sun had suddenly risen over a black sea. For U-boat crews, the experience was terrifying. No warning from detectors, no time to dive. Just a sudden blazing sun and bombs already falling. Survivors remembered chaos, shattered glass, men thrown against steel bulkheads as depth charges exploded. On the German side, the accounts are harrowing. Caught on the surface, U-boat crews often had no time to react. An intelligence report from U-340 in 1944 shows the effect vividly. The Leigh Light was switched on, illuminating a fully surfaced U-boat. Soon after, the submarine opened fire blindly into the glare, but depth charges still fell and shook her hull. The next night, another Wellington found the same boat. At half a mile, the light was switched on again. The U-boat opened heavy and inaccurate flak, but the bomber pressed the attack. Crews went from stealth hunters to sitting ducks in an instant. Sometimes the reports speak more plainly. In the interrogation of U-593, the captain said, "She surfaced to charge batteries." A few minutes later, she was surprised by a searchlight aircraft, no warning having been received on the radar detector. The U-boat opened fire. The plane turned away without attacking. Even when the Leigh Light didn't lead to a sinking, its sudden flare could render a boat helpless and panic-stricken. Perhaps the most vivid personal account comes from U-966. In October 1943, off Galicia, U-966 was attacked by a U.S. Liberator's depth charges. Crewman Herbert Comer recalled, "It was as if an invisible hand grabbed and shook the boat. Complete darkness came over us, and emergency lights came on. There was total chaos. Everything not tied down went flying, and broken glass was everywhere." Whether in darkness or dawn, U-boat crews faced chaos when caught. Leigh Light-equipped aircraft brought that chaos to the night, and crews remembered it long after the war. The Germans fought back with technology of their own. Early on, they installed the Metox radar detector, which warned a U-boat of incoming older radar emissions. For a time, crews could dive before being illuminated. But Coastal Command countered by switching to 10-centimeter ASV Mk3 radar in March 1943. Metox was blind to that wavelength. Germany rushed out the Naxos detector for the new radar, but it only had a short range and often gave too little warning. Even when U-boats knew a radar-equipped plane was near, the Leigh Light still appeared without any electronic hint. They also made tactical changes. After July 1942, U-boat headquarters largely forbade night surface cruising, ordering boats to run on the surface only by day where they at least could see attacking aircraft and return fire. But this only shifted danger. By day, an illuminated U-boat could be caught by patrolling fighters or spotted by escort ships. Some U-boats were fitted with extra anti-aircraft guns, the so-called U-flaks, but this made them slower and still usually proved futile against well-drilled aircrews. Essentially, after autumn 1942, the old advantage of darkness was gone. Many German crews chose to surface during the day, simply because night had become too dangerous. The Leigh Light's action was felt in many notable engagements. In April 1944, U-546 in the Bay of Biscay ran into exactly this fate. A 53 Squadron Liberator closed in, radar picked her up, and the Leigh Light blazed on. The U-boat managed to shoot down the attacking plane with a 37mm gun, but by then she was damaged and dead in the water. The incident dramatically showed that even the much-feared long-range German submarines were vulnerable at night. Earlier, U-boats had been hammered similarly. Every month from mid-1942 through 1943 saw numerous submarines forced under or sunk by searchlight-equipped aircraft. In one October 1943 incident, U-340 made for Gibraltar and endured 2 nights of Leigh Light strikes in succession. First, a Wellington illuminated her and dropped depth charges that shook the boat. The second night, after limping on, another Wellington's light spilled over her from just half a mile away. Again she fired, but could not escape. Eventually, U-340 was sunk under depth charges in November 1943. Nor were the Biscay Knights the only hunts. Leigh Lights were fitted to Catalinas and other patrol planes in the Mediterranean and even to some swordfish in the Channel, closing the last refuges for U-boats. By 1944, the Allies used Leigh Lights in combined day and night hunter-killer groups. Every time the light switched on, U-boat crews faced searing whiteness, machine gun fire, and falling bombs. By Black May 1943, the impact was unmistakable. In that month alone, 41 U-boats were destroyed, and the Atlantic U-boat campaign teetered on collapse. The Leigh Light did not win the war alone, but it was a critical turning point. Coastal command losses fell, merchant loss rates fell, and U-boat wolfpacks on the surface were broken. Admiral Dunitz eventually admitted the submarine's night surfacing days were over. In retrospect, historians often cite the ASV radar and Leigh Light combination as among the decisive tools that ended the submarine threat. In some, a handful of men decided to turn the sky into a weapon. The Leigh Light, a moving daylight in the night sky, effectively turned the tables in coastal warfare. U-boats that had once sailed freely by night were now forced into hiding, day and night, waiting for fog or luck to escape. When it came to nocturnal warfare, the Allies had literally switched on the lights, and the U-boat war would never be the same. For the Allies, it was still dangerous work, but now they could fight at night. For German submariners, the terror grew. Survivors remembered that sudden glare in the seconds before the charges hit. Some dreamed of it decades later. The Battle of the Atlantic turned on such tiny margins. Seconds of warning, a new wavelength of radar, a light that broke the night. In war, small inventions can change everything. The Leigh Light did just that. A beam that tipped the balance and helped save the convoys that fed and armed the Allied world.